So this episode, this wedding feast at Cana, the revelation of the glory of God in the person of Jesus Christ, the church looks at this as the third aspect of the Epiphany. So these past 2 weeks, we've had these other manifestations, this showing forth of the glory of God. First, in the Feast of the Epiphany, when the Magi came, showing that the Gentile nations were being drawn into Jesus, that the covenant was going to be for the entire world. Then last week, we had the baptism, when Jesus began his public ministry, and the voice of the Father was heard by everyone who was standing around as the Father claimed Jesus as his son. And then today, we have this great miracle, this great sign that St. John calls it, this showing forth of his power, of his majesty. As we heard, it revealed his glory. These three moments in the life of Jesus that Mother Church puts together is in this one notion of the Epiphany. We celebrate with great joy. So we're in ordinary time, and this year is year C, and so we'll start listening to Luke's gospel, but we always have this gospel from John as we begin this journey, as it's a bridge to the Christmas season, to that showing forth of Jesus to prepare us to encounter and to engage with him in this public life. But this is a beautiful scene, and it's one that's easy to visualize. As the story is told and the scene unfolds, it's one of those scenes in the life of Jesus that we can easily envision it taking place. And so it should be easy for us to pray with this gospel in the different aspects. Which details stand out to you? Which words, which phrases kind of hang around as you're listening? Where is Jesus drawing you into this revelation of his glory? So this passage begins chapter 2 of John's gospel. But it begins, if you go into the scriptures, where it says, on the third day, there was a wedding at Cana in Galilee. So that third day also should trigger some good things in our minds and our imaginations as we remember the story of salvation. The third day of the resurrection, 3 days that Jesus was in the tomb. But also back in Exodus, when Moses was on the mountain, on the third day is when God gave the covenant, gave the 10 commandments. The third day is the sealing of the covenant. But also when we look at this third day, if we go to the beginning of John's gospel, and if we count the days that are given to us, this third day is the seventh day. So again, that number 7 should strike us, should start within us some imagery. That number 7, which is so important for us in the faith. But we know John begins his gospel with, in the beginning was the Word, which he is purposely pointing us back to the beginning of the first book of Genesis, which begins in the beginning. So in John's gospel, we're having this new creation story. And again, that's one way, as I said before, that the lens, the viewpoint to take to the gospel, it's a new creation story. That God has come in the person of Jesus to make things new, to restore what was lost from the initial creation account. And in that initial creation account, what happened on the seventh day? God rested in a great celebration as he entered into and enjoyed his creation, which is why Sunday, our Sabbath, is a day that's set apart from servile labor. It's set apart for family life, for our faith, for coming to Mass, to enjoying God's creation and allowing our leisurely time to recreate us. This is why Sunday is so important. And John, in his gospel, chose to describe it as a wedding feast and this event that really took place. And we see the prominent role Our Lady is in this. Our Lady was invited, and then Jesus and his friends also. So even in this passage, we see this prominent role Our Lady is playing. And what does she play? She simply points out the situation. She sees the need, and she brings that need to Jesus. This is why we love Our Lady. She's observant. She's anticipating our needs. And without even being asked, she made this request to her son on behalf of the guests who had invited her. When we have a devotion to our Blessed Mother and we invite her into our heart, we invite her into our life, she does the same thing. She anticipates our needs. She sees where we are lacking, and she brings that need to her son. This is the great role Our Lady plays in our life. What an amazing gift our Father has given us. And we know at the end of John's gospel, when Jesus is dying on the cross. We have that beautiful passage where Jesus gives his mother to John as his mother and tells John that he is now her son, to take her into his home. So all these years later, John's telling us this story about this woman who became his mother. And he's telling us what role she plays in our life. And Jesus refers to her as woman. Again, John's story, this recreation, going back to the first story of creation, the woman is there. That woman who said no to God and yes to herself is now being replaced by this new woman, the new Eve, who says no to herself and says yes to the Father's plan. This woman is our Blessed Mother, who does nothing but intercede for us so that we too have what we need to say yes to God's plan for our life. And what happens in this scene? The wine ran out. Throughout the Old Testament, it's often given as a prophecy, as a sign of that future day of resurrection, that future day of restoration, that even the hills would be overflowing with wine, that the abundant presence of wine would be a sign of God's favor for his people. So this is why their celebrations had wine was such an important part, because they knew that in their wedding celebrations, in their festivities, that they were getting a foretaste. There's a foreshadow of that great day to come when we go to heaven. And so in their celebrations, which is what our Sundays should be, celebrations as a foretaste of what is to come in heaven. And so the fact that the wine was running out was a big deal. Not only was it going to be a huge embarrassment for the family who was hosting the party, but symbolically, it shows a lack of God's favor. And Our Lady steps in. Our Lady gets into that gap to make sure that there's always enough. And she simply says they have no wine. And she leaves it at that. So simple. Our prayer life doesn't need to be so extravagant, so wordy, so magnificent. Oftentimes we fail to pray because we don't think we know how. We don't have the right words, or I don't know God well enough, or I'm not smart enough, or I'm not holy enough, or I'm not whatever, fill in the blank. The simple request, they have no wine. Simple. And that simple request changed the course of history. It's not my hour. This isn't the time. What's going on? But Jesus said yes to his mother's request, revealed his glory. The disciples began to believe, and we know the rest of the story. Why did this happen the way it did? Simply because Our Lady observed the fact that they needed help. And what did Jesus do? His whole point was to make more wine. He was filling their need. He could have just thought they need wine, and wine could have appeared. He could have had their wine glasses never run empty. Wine could have fallen from the sky like rain. I mean, he's God. He can do whatever. But what happened? Simply, fill those jars with water. 20 to 30 gallons. If any of you have those water coolers in your house or at your office, those big 5-gallon jugs, you know how heavy that is. Can you just imagine, so we won't imagine this scene, how did those jugs, those stone jars get filled with water? How much work, how much energy, how much effort did those servants have to go to fill it? God could have done it anyway, but he chose it this way. He chose to incorporate the help of these servants. We can say he needed their help. He expected their help. Jesus expects our cooperation in this life of grace. He didn't say, go find some wine, go to the store and buy some. He said, do what you can do. You can't create wine, but you can go find some water and fill these jars. When you're lacking in your life, spiritual gifts, physical gifts, when your family life is not as you thought it should be, when your children are not behaving the way they should, when your adult children leave the faith, when you get that medical diagnosis, when we're facing the economics of our country, when we are lacking, when we have no wine, are we satisfied? And do we trust that if we just do what we can, that God can and will do the rest? Another lie that keeps us from cooperating with God's grace is because we think we can't do enough. What can I do? I'm old, I'm poor, I'm young, I'm whatever. I don't have the time. I don't have the knowledge. I don't have the resources. Jesus asked them to do what they could do. The simple, naturally occurring element of water was all it took, and their willingness to cooperate. We have the same opportunity to allow God's glory to be revealed in our lives. If we simply surrender and submit to that simple request, fill the jars with water. What can you do to cooperate with God's grace? What gifts that St. Paul talked about in that second reading? What has the Lord given you that you can share so that God can do an amazing work? This is what it means to be a disciple, to be a faithful follower of Jesus, is that we simply do our part. We cooperate with the work of grace. When someone else is lacking, we do what we can to help fill them up. We stand in the gap. We intercede for them the way Our Lady interceded for this couple. We simply fill their jars. We have an amazing invitation, opportunity to relive this scenario, to reveal God's glory, to change hearts, to change lives, to change the world. And then the last words we have of our Blessed Mother recorded in the sacred scriptures. Again, so simple. What does it mean to be a disciple? What does it mean to be faithful to God and to his church? Do whatever he tells you. Simple. So what is he asking you to do? What is he telling you to do? So you have to listen to him. This is an invitation to prayer, to read sacred scriptures, to know the church's teachings, so that we can do whatever he tells you. Again, this is such a beautiful gift Mother Church has given us as she unpacks this scripture for us. This recreation, that things don't have to be the way they are. We don't have to go along on our life with empty jars and running out of wine. How it looks in each one of our lives is different. We can't hear the story and expect this same kind of miracle that all of our problems go away in just an instant. But God's grace will flow in abundance, the same way the wine did. 180 gallons, a superabundance of God's grace, of God's favor, and that's waiting for you. It's available for you right now in this moment, in every moment of your life. So invite our Blessed Mother to your heart, like this couple invited her to their party. Open your heart, open the recesses of your heart to our Blessed Mother. Give her access. Be devoted to her. Like St. John did at the end of the gospel, bring her into your home. Rest with her and trust that she will take you always to her Son. And when he speaks, when he cries out to you, listen to Our Lady and do whatever he tells you. Amen.